Between now and actual meaningful football, what exactly are the Vikings going to do with J.J. McCarthy? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate you all so very much. One more show before the Super Bowl and the offseason starts for everybody in earnest. But of course, we're already in the offseason. So we are doing a Twitter Tuesday mailbag. That means I am taking your questions as submitted to me on Blue Sky or via the Google form in the show notes, or anytime you can send me an email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. First question I am taking today comes from Blimby, who asks, what, if any, kind of training or coaching can the Vikings give J.J. McCarthy between now and the beginning of next season? Before I answer that, Blimby, every time I see your name, I think of the series finale to 30 Rock. If you know, you know. Okay, so what can they do with J.J. McCarthy? So what the Vikings are allowed to do, if that's what you're asking, is very, very, very limited. They can give him a directive. You know, they can send him away with a sheet of paper that says, we want you to work on X, Y, and Z. But they can't bring him into the facility. I believe he has access if he wants to, like, use the weight room or whatever. But they can't do anything organized with the team. Right. So a lot of players will go work out on their own. You might see J.J. McCarthy go like hook up with all of his old Michigan buddies and go like throw to Roman Wilson at a high school field somewhere. Like that kind of stuff will happen. Or maybe, you know, he'll go link up with the LSU crew and go hang out with Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and a couple of tight ends that hang out with those guys and like all those guys. Right. That is kind of up to the players. And for union reasons, it has to be up to the players. There's like not really a lot of latitude the teams have for interfering with that. But if we're talking about what kind of training J.J. McCarthy can do to improve, so here's where he's at least my understanding of where he's at based on some reports and some public info, some private info, is that he is throwing, he's back to practicing in mostly a full capacity. And he's fully expected to be ready to go well before OTAs. That was always the case. If you freaked out about the second knee injury or because Adam Schefter accidentally called it an ACL, there you go. It's never been an ACL. It's not that. And there is never really been any serious question marks about J.J. McCarthy's availability for the start of camp, let alone like week one or anything like that. That's never really been part of the Vikings calculus when it comes to like Sam Darnold and stuff. So there's that. Where J.J. McCarthy is ahead is mentally. My understanding is in the room, in his role on the sideline. You see him walking around with a play sheet. All of that has been excellent. Everybody's really happy with that. We're doing great. And because he hasn't been able to do anything physically, it kind of makes sense to me that he has been, excelling mentally, because that's the only thing he can actually put any energy into. And if there's one thing that I have come to understand about professional athletes, covering them, doing the Everyman series every year, and just listening to them talk a lot as part of this job, it's that when you're hurt, it is a test of patience in a way that if you haven't been like out for the season hurt before, with J.J. McCarthy is not. He's been hurt, but he's never been, you got to wait a calendar year before you can play football hurt. There is it's really hard in a way that they're not used. They're used to doing hard things. Practice is hard. Being in the NFL for a million reasons is hard. But being hurt is a different kind of hard than anyone's familiar with. Justin Jefferson actually talked about it really intimately on the Netflix series, The Receiver, on like how difficult it was to be out just 8 weeks, let alone a whole season. And so you have to channel your energy into something. And so if you can work on the mental game, if you've got work to do nonetheless, and you can do that, it totally makes sense that a professional athlete would like go super hard on that and be feeling really good there. Physically, though, the progress has been completely grinded to a halt since the day he was diagnosed and they decided to give him surgery, right? So mechanically, you're still trying to work on a lot of the stuff that I've talked about in the past on this show. If you look up on this podcast feed, JJ McCarthy, you will get some really nitty gritty stuff about his mechanics and his hip rotation and the way his arm comes through and his way his back foot and his follow through and what that tells you. And all of that is to say he was making really good progress toward that in the preseason. And you could kind of feel that, okay, this kid's going to be ready at some point in the season. And of course that got put on pause, but now you have to resume that work. And I would assume he's doing that as soon as he's ready to like actually be throwing on his knee again, which if he's not, I mean, he is throwing, but if he's ready to like truly like practice working on mechanics rather than working on rehab, which if he's not there already, he's at least close. MB Jerk asks, if you had to pick a top free agent quarterback candidate who's not Murphy or Shaq, who would it be? I don't know about bringing back Shaq in the first place. It certainly wouldn't make him the top candidate. I mean, Murphy's probably the top for me, yeah. But if not him, the two names that I am in love with are DJ Reed and Charvarius Ward. I have loved these two guys for a long time. Charvarius Ward is a guy that every time I watch the 49ers, I look up his contract and see when he's becoming a free agent. If he actually does hit free agency, he doesn't stick with the 49ers or whatever. I don't know the first thing about that situation. My goodness, would I be excited about him. DJ Reed, roughly the same price, at least according to the PFF projections. They're all around $14 million a year, 14.5. Also a phenomenal player. I'd be doing pretty much just as many backflips. Charvarius Ward's kind of like my guy here, though. But there are a lot of interesting names. I mean, an older name is Mike Hilton, who I think fits the Vikings really well. But I think that's more of a like, okay, we're going to get the older guy and see if he's still got something in the tank. It'd be very similar to a Shaq Griffin signing, and I don't think it'd be particularly expensive. But for me, it's DJ Reed and Charvarius Ward. I think depending on the day you ask me, I'm going to give you a different answer. Today, I will say Charvarius Ward is my guy. But honestly, like if you asked me like 3 days ago, I might have said Reed. So it's one of those two guys. Pick your favorite. Tong asks, if you were Brian Flores, what adjustments would you look at going into next year? And does that change the scope of what you'd like to see in offseason acquisitions? Boy, so Tong asked this question last week, and I think I said something over the course of the week that was about like when I talked about like free agent targets and stuff. And especially about how, it was with the Senior Bowl guys, about how stunts kind of were the rise and fall of the Flores defense, that if you can be fast at stunts, you can be like stunt all the time and be really, really hard for offensive lines to sort out. But if you're slow at stunts and you stunt all the time, the Rams happen to you. And it happened to them twice. Both games, that happened to them. It was terrible. So I need lateral quickness. In particular, you need to be able to stunt. You might be able to look at like a 3-cone as like a sort of proxy for that. It's a little loose. Mostly, just look at him stunt. Can he stunt? That is just a huge thing. And if you can't find those guys, so I think it's kind of the causality of your question. I'm doing it the other way around. If you can't find those guys, you have to back off the stunts. So the scope of free agency is maybe affecting the scheme. And I'd much rather make that decision based on the talent I can get in the building rather than coming up with an idea and trying to get the guys for it. Khaled asks, if Flores wants to continue the funky blitzing and have his interior linemen be more of just contained pocket pushers whenever he's not in light personnel, is there much value in trying to improve defensive tackle as the top defensive priority over stacking the DB room, barring Flores trying to move to being a more normal defense at times and whipping the funky pressure packages out at certain moments? I think you've made a great point. And I think getting corner under control, again, I'm going to do the causality a different way here. The funky blitzing and all this, the weird zone blitz behind like pressure packages stuff that Flores has done has been a little bit of a move out of necessity, and I think a little bit less of a move out of style. I don't think he wants to be doing this. I think ideal world, you ask any DC, hey, you're going to blitz. What coverage would you like behind it? You have all the guys you want. He'd be, well, then I'm man covering. If I've got the guys, I'm man covering. But we don't have the guys. We haven't had the guys. We've had piecemeal. We've had 1 year deals on washed up veterans. So I fully am of the mind that corner is the highest priority. At the very least, just numbers wise. I mean, the room is very barren right now unless you start getting some extensions signed and some free agents brought in. So for me, I'm with you 1,000,000% that DB is more important than just, getting a little more out of your defensive pass rush. But I also am not a huge fan of, skinny designated pass rush defensive tackles. You have to be a run defender at that position before you have to be a pass rusher. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart. It has this like ripple effect across the whole defense. And so for me, yeah, getting a little more out of your pass rush is nice. Out of your interior pass rush is nice. But those guys have other jobs than that. And corners you want to be able to give them other jobs than that and not have to be like, well, I guess you're playing cover 2 again because that's all we can ask you to do because you're 106 years old. Like, let's be done with that, please. I've got a whole bunch more questions here on this Mailbag Tuesday episode, so that will all be coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Betterhelp. If you've been thinking about getting into therapy, whether it's to help you form better relationships, maintain the ones you have, or just to maintain your mental health and treat it like your physical health with actual regular work that goes into it. Whatever it is, therapy can obviously be something that's a little bit daunting to get into. How do I find the right person? How do I make time in my schedule? BetterHelp is designed to help you with all of that. It's online, it's flexible, it's suited to your schedule, and with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from, BetterHelp makes it easy to get involved. If you need to switch therapists, by the way, you can do so at no extra cost. So give therapy a try with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today, and you can get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Let's move on with this. Somebody called it Mailbag Martez. I love that. Mailbag Martez. Let's do one from Cizo, who asks, if Danny Dimes returns as QB2, does that mean we shouldn't expect Mullins to return? Probably. I don't think Mullins is a QB3. I think that he deserves to get paid like a backup, which is nickels and dimes, but you're going from vet min to $4, maybe $5 million, that kind of thing. So I think he can go get that job, but he takes jobs that the Chase Daniels of the world take, not the Skylar Thompsons of the world. So I think if Danny Dimes is QB2, and assuming that means you're letting Darnold walk, you have JJ McCarthy, Daniel Jones, and then you had like a 6th round rookie or, I don't know, like put your McLeod Bethel Thompson here, whoever that is, however you get him. A whole bunch of people who think they're Kevin also asked questions. I'm going to take 2 of them. So one of the not Kevins asks, the Vikings prioritized Kevin O'Connell's contract extension over Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah's. Is this proof Kwesi is on the hot seat? I don't know where this is coming from. I don't trust where that's coming from at all. The extension with Kwesi is underway, and honestly, I would expect it kind of any day. Clearly, they're doing that, and it's probably going to sync up with Kevin O'Connell. What's interesting is I still don't think we have terms of Kevin O'Connell's contract. And it seems as though this is on Access Vikings where the Strib guys were talking about this. They were like, maybe the Vikings don't want that because they don't want, and maybe Kevin O'Connell doesn't want the media sniffing around, oh, you're in a contract here, is that going to change things? Like, they don't want to deal with that. So we might never find out what the terms of the deal are, or if we do, we'll find out, well after this story has left the news cycle. And then hopefully, the Vikings will hope that it'll like stay quieter there. And I think it's just to avoid like an annoying press narrative, which you know what? I get it. Shut up, Kevin. Another one of these false Kevins asks, assuming we go less deep shot, more zoney when swapping to a JJ McCarthy offense, how do you think that affects the defense's approach to the game? Are they still an aggressive unit focused on chaos and turnovers? With Brian Flores, absolutely. I think if it were someone else, then it would kind of be down to that person's mentality, like that coordinator's like approach. But I don't think that it affects the defense's approach to the game. I don't think that, put it this way, I don't think Kevin O'Connell will stop being an aggressive coach ever. Even with JJ McCarthy, who I don't want to like, I did say that like it's going to be a little bit less, all shot plays, because that might have been more of a Darnold thing. And we've seen versions of Kevin O'Connell's offense that aren't really like that with Kirk or with, the myriad of random quarterbacks at the end of 2023. They were different. It was a different vibe. And so he's tailoring things to the quarterback, and maybe that'll be a little bit more normal, but I don't think it won't become conservative. He's not going to become Daniel Jones, even though maybe Daniel Jones will fit that kind of offense better. He's not going to become, average depth of targets going down below, 5 yards and suddenly turning into the Oregon Ducks like that. I don't think O'Connell will ever do that. And definitely, I don't think that affects the defense's approach at all. It's completely two separate units, two separate masterminds, and two separate groups of people. Josh has a long one here. You mentioned in your free agency target list that you weren't too concerned about linebacker as a need for the team. However, the Vikings spent several weeks realizing that either one of their current starters going out would have a big impact on the team's success defensively. Feels like finding that third linebacker is a step above Kamu should be a bigger issue than you might think. Thoughts? I see what you're saying here. And I talked about it throughout the season when Cashman was out and then later when Ivan Pace was out, and how the Vikings kind of struggle with their backup. The backup got attacked, whether that backup was Kamu Grugier-Hill or Josh Metellus out of position or Andrew Van Ginkel out of position or Dallas Turner out of position. All of those people got attacked, and it really struggled. The Vikings really struggled there. The Lions and Rams took a big advantage of that in the middle of the season. And then both those guys were in the playoffs in the last game of the regular season, and the Lions and Rams still cooked them. So maybe it was less about that than I had come to believe. But I do think, I don't think Kamu is under contract. Yeah, he was only on a 1-year deal. That's what I thought. So replacing him in general is a need. Whether you get better or worse than him, good luck. But replacing your call it your third linebacker, your first reserve linebacker, is going to be a need. And obviously they don't like Brian Asamoah for that. He's a special teamer at this point in his career. So that will be an issue. But when comparing it, when I'm talking about free agent targets, I'm talking about like guys that are going to be the starters. I'm talking about Jonathan Grenard's sized signings here right now. The depth guys that show up, I'll cover it when they happen, but I wasn't really previewing guys that are primarily going to be backups that should come into the roster. But it'll have to be somebody. It could be a D3 draft pick that has a good camp. It could be another Troy Reader-esque signing that they expect to come in and be that guy. But it'll be somebody. They'll get somebody. Bad dad joke says, I've noticed that day 3 players often fit into certain categories. There are highly polished role players, Devi lottery tickets with high relative athletic scores, proven track record, both with injuries or subpar measurables, and etc. Based on analytics or vibe, could you describe a successful strategy for getting value out of day 3 picks? Boy. So there isn't a solve for this. Let me first just start. I'll give you my best philosophy, but contained within any philosophy, necessarily, there must be, and by the way, you have to be right about it. There has to be a subjective matter. So what I'll say is, for me, what I like in day 3 is guys that have fallen for a reason that might be stupid. There's a great quote, I cannot remember who said it, but it's, and I'll paraphrase it, but it's something like, look, if he's from a big school and he's a good athlete and he was healthy and he's available in the 6th round, there's only one reason left. It's because he sucks. And, if he went to a small school, he was really, really good, but gosh, he just, he went to Jackson State. Then maybe he's in the 6th round. You go, okay, well, maybe that guy was just a diamond in the rough. And you have to look, hey, why was he at Jackson State? Maybe that was close to home. Maybe his dad went there, right? Maybe there are reasons, right? Or was it that he just couldn't get into another college because he was a 1-star recruit and he was just dunking on all these other guys at, smaller schools? So you have to look into that. Just saying, well, small school guys on day 3 are good is reductive. It has to be guys who are small school but shouldn't have been small school. It has to be guys who are injured and you're not worried about that injury. Guys with bad measurables, but they come with a solution to their own problem. Like Ivan Pace. Okay, bad measurables, right? He's a small player, but he's got the pop and he comes with the physicality that you want from a guy that's that small that you know he can compensate for it, right? Like that kind of thing. So that's why I'm being really vague about it. Guys who fell for a dumb reason, but you have to be right about how it was a dumb reason. You know, Kenny Willekes fell because of an injury, but that turned out to be pretty important. So that's there's still like a large layer of subjectivity in that. And I want to be really cautious as to not try to boil the draft into an objective thing when it is a very much subjective thing. Boy, I have a lot more questions, and I don't know if I'm going to get to all of them, but I'm going to do my level best. That's going to be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We are done beating around the bush. The time is here. Super Bowl 59. 2 teams, 1 game, endless possibilities. Whether you are predicting the first touchdown or any touchdown or the MVP or the coin toss or the Gatorade color or whatever it is, even live betting all game long, FanDuel has you covered. So if you get a hunch at halftime because the Chiefs are down and you know Patrick Mahomes has a penchant for comebacks, FanDuel has all of the stats and information you need to make a decision to make sure you hit that button right at the right time and maximize your odds. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field. The app is super easy to navigate, and you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. Just download the app or head to FanDuel.com and get started. And if you bet $5 and you win that first bet, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's at FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 59. This episode is also brought to you by PrizePicks, a great way to make things exciting this Sunday. All you got to do, it's way simple. All you got to do is pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. So throw that in your lineups just to get a little extra sauce on there, right? A little extra electricity. Pair it with even just 1 more correct pick, and you can cash out. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie winners big game lineups as well. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, rapid fire time here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Next question comes from Court's mom, lovely as ever, who asks, what do you see wrong with the interior of the line? Communication, form, hands. This is a question that is too general to answer easily. It's different guy to guy. Cam Robinson getting beat inside. That's a problem with the way that he squares his hips, where everybody else doesn't square their hips at the same angle. It creates a weak point, just a physical weak point in the line. That's like a closet door, and it's a really easy way to push in on it, and it creates a weak gap. That's just a fit thing. And with Darisaw back, hopefully that papers over. But communication is also bad with Blake Brandel picking up stunts. He commits to stunts way too often. The Vikings have a rule set, and most O-lines have a rule set where as soon as a guy crosses your face, he becomes yours. So like the border between your guy and my guy is drawn at like the middle of the face mask. So if a guy wants to attack an inside gap without crossing the face mask, it still would technically be like if I don't cross Cam Robinson's face mask, I'm still Blake Brandel's guy. And then you can attack that rule set with a stunt, and you just kind of have to look alive. And that's a communication issue. There are technique things that I fall in a different style of, which makes me a little bit less equipped to talk about them. But I would say they've got a size issue as well on the interior with Reisner and Bradbury. Ingram didn't have that issue. He had other issues. But Reisner and Bradbury, that's a size issue. Blake Brandel's huge. He's a tackle. Like, that's not as big of an issue. But obviously, you get a Jeffrey Simmons across the way. He's going to be able to bull rush some guys. So, yeah, there's a few things. But I also think that this was an average offensive line season. And I think that generally we expect offense. Like, nobody likes their offensive line. I think 20 fan bases would say that their offensive line is bottom 5. And so I think we have to put it into perspective of the rest of the league. And I think half the teams have a worse offensive line situation than the Vikings do. I really do. Stevie asks, I often hear that guard is a difficult position to learn and that can take a few seasons. So why are so many ready to give up on Brandel after one season at guard that went well until Darisaw was hurt? I don't know if I would say it went well until Darisaw was hurt. I think he was maybe a little overrated and then people just noticed it more. And, if Darisaw was papering over your flaws, I can't really say you were having a good season. He was just having one and you were next to it. But that's semantic. I think the Vikings are in lockstep with you, Stevie, to be honest. I don't think that you're going to be, I think you're going to be vindicated here because they have Brandel on a 3-year deal. They basically gave him the starter with no serious competition whatsoever and let him do it all year long, even through struggles and whatnot. So he's got 2 years left on this deal. And when your starter has 2 years left on the deal, that is not the guy that a free agent is going to necessarily come in and take over for. I could see maybe another year of this and then go figure it out, but I don't think that they give up on him. I mean, people are frustrated with O-lines, but like I said, it's because I think I think generally with O-line in particular, you want to never, ever think about it, which means that the most you can think about an O-line is that it's average. But in the first 8 games of the season, Vikings O-line was a top 10 unit. Fight me. Johnny says, with so much cap flexibility, we go all in on O-line, turn a decent O-line into a great O-line, right? Oh, Johnny. Oh, bud. I don't have to start naming names, do I? I don't have to Alex Boone this for you, do I? Money ain't going to solve the problem. It's not guaranteed to. And that's another thing. Again, we have this expectation that a good O-line is simply a commitment away. I say this is maybe more implied than it ever is said. But with a lot of articles, a lot of the way that I get questions sometimes that are like this one, there is this implication that, well, if the Vikings simply got serious about O-line, they would fix the O-line. Why don't they spend more? Why don't they spend more draft capital? Why don't they spend more money? And for one, because they care about other stuff more. And if you disagree with that, fine, but that's where they're at. But for two, just going out and buying an expensive guy, especially on O-line, is a really inefficient game. You're spending millions and millions to go from a 55% chance of working out to a 60% chance of working out. You know what I mean? And Lord help you if you're the one that gets stuck with the Andrew Norwell disaster, right? With the third contract, Brandon Scherf, and he sucks. So it's about risk and efficiency of asset management and all that stuff. If you want to just talk about like, well, we've got all this cap flexibility, let's go all in on O-line. I don't think that's a good idea at all. Ball Newer asks, do you think there's truth in the idea that the Vikings offense won't improve without more physicality? Cook! Yeah. It's a very vague point. I think it's too vague to be too meaningful. Like, yeah, of course, more physicality will always be better for any team. I don't think there's a single team in the league that won't want more physicality. And again, early in the season when the Vikings were wrecking shop with duo, with, you had Garrett Bradbury and Blake Brandel just like sledding good defensive tackles down the field. And like the 49ers, the healthy San Francisco 49ers, they were beating them up. Not to mention, guys on the Packers, which was at times one of the better defenses in the league, and they were beating them up. So they definitely had physicality up front. And then they just didn't keep it with not staying healthy, with making the swap for a little more finesse with Reisner. So I do think it exists on that axis for sure. It's a vague point, but that doesn't mean it's an incorrect one. Mr. Mayor the Fourth says, I don't understand why CJ Ham is an outright no on cap casualty talks. So this is a response to the Minnesota Football Party, which you can find on the Locked On Minnesota Sports YouTube page or on this feed 3 times a week. I'm on 2 of those. And we were talking about cap casualties, and people were like, "Well, CJ Ham does save $3 million," and I was like, "No." And you want to know why? Because I don't want to. This is purely emotional. It's It's also probably not efficient. Someone has to be your fullback. So who are you replacing CJ Ham with? How much money are you actually saving? And are you getting worse at that position? The diversity in personnel packages is a really important thing to offenses nowadays. You can't be like the 2018 Rams where you're just 11 personnel all day long. We do 3 wide receivers. We don't pay for anybody else. And Mr. Mayor, the Force cited like his snap count being low and stuff. It's going up, and having a CJ Ham, a Josh Oliver, and a Jalen Naylor is important. You need all 3, and you need to spend assets on all 3, even if it's just a 5th round draft pick or $7 million. They won't be your most expensive assets, but they do need to be in the building, and they do need to be trustworthy people, lest you become one-dimensional. Having all of those options is good and is providing value even when one guy isn't on the field. Just the fact that you made him prepare for 21 personnel is going to make it that much harder for them to also prepare for Josh Oliver, and it's going to make Josh Oliver's job easier. It compounds. So, yeah. But also, for emotional reasons, he's a no, and I won't hear any guff about it. Kenny Roche asks, in honor of the ridiculous Luka trade that went down this weekend, how upset would you be if Justin Jefferson got traded without his or anyone's knowledge of it happening? Yeah, so for it to be even remotely realistic, it would have had to happen last year, where it was a fiction. I mean, there were people trying to push it, but it was fiction that it was ever on the table. But let's say it was on the table and it was a thing that happened. I think we'd be storming TCO, no? Especially if it was for. So I asked, like, somebody put the Luka trade in football terms for me. YouTube comments, put the Luka trade in football terms for me. Okay, tell me what it is, because I don't really pay attention to basketball, but this of course came across my consciousness. Somebody said it would be like trading Josh Allen for Matthew Stafford, straight up, right after a Super Bowl appearance. That seemed to be the one that was the most amicable to people. So you tell me if that person was right or if you have a better analogy. Anyways, yeah, we would all be very mad, and rightfully so. Scooter asks, I'm almost certain it used to be illegal to push a player forward on offense. When and why did this change? I had to look this up, but 2005 is when this changed. And why is because it was too hard to accurately enforce. They just couldn't see it, so they just kind of gave up on enforcing it. And they thought, I don't know, you're pushing the pile, you're pushing a guy, you're blocking, or you got your hands on a back or your hands on a shoulder blade, and it's like this big like scrum of bodies. I can't really see what's going on, whatever. And so that's kind of why they did that. Charles asks, these are Super Bowl questions. These are Eagles questions. Asks, if the tush push were to be banned, how do you expect the rule would be worded or structured? What would exactly need to be outlawed? So I am of the mind that I don't think the tush push needs to be banned. I know people get annoyed with it and that it's a boring play, but it's an effective play. And guess what? When you're a football team, you're not trying to do this with flash. Your goal is not style points. Your goal is points on the scoreboard. So I respect the tush push. It's a QB sneak, and the Eagles are very good at QB sneaks. And honestly, my hot take, the actual push part of it has nothing to do with their success. I think they just are very good at blowing guys off the ball. They're very good at picking gaps. I think people defend their sneaks really poorly, and they're really good at punishing that. And if you took the actual push part out of it, then I don't think it would affect the Eagles' efficacy at all. And I would be in favor of that because I think it would be a player safety thing. So you would say something like, you can't have a player line up at the snap and then immediately go into pushing another player who gets the ball or something like that. I don't know how you would word that. I can't answer that for you, Charles. But it would be about the pusher. It wouldn't be about the sneak in general. And I don't think it would slow the Eagles down one iota. Finally, Wham Warnold asks, what are the best foods with jalapenos as either the main ingredient or a prominent ingredient? I don't eat jalapenos a lot, but when I do, I pretty much always love it. And I think about, like, look, a jalapeno popper is probably the gold standard here. Who doesn't love that? But think about a jalapeno. It's very bright and it's very spicy. What does that go well with? Rich, fatty. So we're talking meat and cheese. So I think anything with a meat and cheese, especially beef and cheese, is going to be improved by a jalapeno. From your classic, jalapenos on a burger, phenomenal. On a nacho, right? Like a loaded nacho, unbelievable. A classic. Mac and cheese, oh my goodness, right? Anything that's like heavy and decadent is going to want to be broken up with those pops of like really nice acid and heat. But I'm going to even go further. Put it in a meatloaf. Put it in like any meat dish. I mean, just like pop a couple on, like if you just made like a pork chop, pop a couple jalapenos on there. It's probably going to be good. Kind of a can't miss thing, if you ask me, as long as you're not putting it on top of like ice cream or something. But even though like I say that, I'd try it. I'm not above it. All right. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.